It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show, only on Secular Media Network.
Well, hello there, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and this is the Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 166. A little bit later in the show, we will have an interview with Liz Liddell. She is the executive director for the Reason Rally, and for full disclosure, I am the treasurer for the board of directors for the Reason Rally. But she is going to give us way more information than I knew about. Everything about the Reason Rally, everything you're ever going to want to know, and it's only weeks away. If you're listening to this in late April or May, it's weeks away. It's June 4th, but it's not just June 4th. There's many other activities, and she's going to tell us about the 45-plus speakers. She's going to tell us about multiple musical acts. She's going to talk to us about how you get there via a bus, where you can stay, about the after parties, about the entire extra convention the Sunday after the Reason Rally. The list goes on and on and on. So after our Investing Skeptically segment, you can hear about all of that. And thank you to all of the new listeners who have recently come over after hearing my interview, doing the podcast with Seth Andrews on the Thinking Atheist podcast. I am genuinely and truly humbled by the wildly, overwhelmingly positive response. So thank you for that. And, of course, thank you for coming and listening. We also did video with that. It's on YouTube, and it has several thousand views. And from my experience, YouTube is notoriously, sardonic, bitter, mean-spirited, whatever you want to use. But last I looked, the upvotes were 320, and the downvote was 1. Additionally, almost all the comments are positive. It seems like people generally can relate to my straightforward, frank, direct, if not even profane way of looking at finance and investments. And recently I was talking to somebody, and they said, Phil, after listening to you, I almost get the impression that the whole thing is a scam. And I don't know that I want to go that far to say that everything is a scam, because it's not all bad. But these companies are set up to make money. Their goal is to make as much money as humanly possible. And a lot of the information that they provide you, they only provide you because some law was passed to force them to do so. And even then, they will often hide the information inside of incredibly long, wordy, and complicated documents, because technically that meets the legal requirement for them to disclose information. So they're complying with the law. Another thing that one must also keep in mind is that there is a big difference between legal and ethical. What they can do to you is legal. You may argue, I know I have and will continue to do so, that it's not necessarily ethical or morally correct, but it's legal. To which, I think it was last week, I had a little rant about someone that sent me an email about the significance of the word fiduciary. See, I'm trying, folks. I'm trying to say it right. I've been told a million times. I'm going to keep working on this. If I actually get it right, I'd love to have an email saying, good job. Fiduciary. I'm working on it. And after my rant about his email, he sent me another email that was probably kinder than I deserved. So I wanted to thank that listener for taking the high road and maybe actually being better at the high road than I was with my email. And I really appreciated that. The one point that he wanted to readdress, and I think there's merit to it, is that if nothing else, while I think an advisor calling themselves a fiduciary and following the fiduciary standard is very, very important, and we disagree about the importance of that, I will agree with him that that is not that's not going to guarantee you success. It's not going to guarantee you that the person doesn't say that and then still do something that is unethical, because, again, government regulators can only check so often. They can only check so much. So it is still critically important that you pay attention. I do have clients. I'm not going to name anybody, of course, but I do have clients that say, Phil, here's the money. Take it over. Do whatever you do. I don't care. I don't want to know. I don't want to look at it. I have a really hard time wrapping my head around that because I love doing this so much. But you do need to be a participant. I want you to be a participant, whether you hire me or hire somebody else. So keep all that in mind. Having someone that is a fiduciary is important, but I will agree with the emailer that it's not necessarily a guarantee of success, and that you still have to understand and follow and pay attention to what you're doing. Another email that got a lot of emails this last week. Another email that I got was from somebody that heard my show recently and heard me mention that pretty much everybody should have a CPA. Now, if you're going to do the 1040 EZ form, or you've only been working a couple of years and you only make $10, $15, $20, $30,000, you want to save the $100 or $200, fine, whatever. I still think it's not a bad expense. Save money on coffees, do something. And he gave me a nice long email, which I won't bore you with all the details, but basically he was in a situation where they ended up selling a lot of stock to pay for a new house that they were having built for themselves. And because they sold so much stock at one time, they expected to pay the capital gains. And he was all ready and set to pay the capital gains. But because of the amount of stock that they sold, he got tripped up in all kinds of other taxes. So if your income jumps in a certain year, not only do you have the capital gains that you might have to pay, you can start losing allowances and deductions. And he also got tripped up an extra $12,000 in alternative minimum tax. So he expected to pay maybe $50,000 or $60,000 in capital gains tax, but ended up owing about $30,000 more than expected. And he, in his email, said that if he had a CPA, and he could have met with the CPA and said, here's my plan, the CPA could run the numbers and give you advice maybe how you could break that up over 2 years or 3 years so that your numbers for 1 year don't get so big. And maybe by paying $200 or $300 or $500 for the CPA to do some work for you, he could have possibly saved the vast majority of that extra $30,000 in taxes. So really seriously think about using a CPA. I told you the story before about how I just pocketed $500 because my CPA found something that I didn't. The other topic I have, which I hadn't planned on particularly, but it came up, I got another email from somebody, and I'll just say that his name is Don. You don't need a last name, but he got approached by a friend, and I love this. It's a friend, really. I hope they're not a close friend, Don, suggesting that he should buy something called Variable Universal Life. Now, if you're a regular listener to my show, you will understand I'm not a big fan of insurance in general. You only insure things that you can't afford to lose, like your house or a car. Even then, when my cars get down to about $5,000 value, I drop all the collision. And I've done that for many, many years, and I save about $1,200 to $1,500 a year on my car insurance. And if one of my older cars is totaled, I might have been able to get $4,000 or $5,000 from the insurance company if they deem it's worth that much. They might even say it was worth $3,000 and hand me $3,000, and my deductible was $1,000, so I'd only get $2,000. So instead, I don't pay for the collision insurance. I'm taking a little bit extra risk. Insurance provides you peace of mind. It does. That's what it does. But it takes your money. So I take a little more risk than maybe most people, and maybe more than you're willing to take, but I end up with more money in the end. And once you've done it for a few years, and I've done this for over a decade now, I've pocketed almost $15,000 by not having collision insurance on one or two of my older cars. It's another reason to buy used cars, and since I'm talking about this, it popped into my head. A few people have overgeneralized from my episode where I talked about the fact that I bought a new car. I've had people actually say to me, "Hey, Phil, I'm so glad I heard that show and that you justified that buying a new car is cheaper." Well, first of all, my analysis did not suggest, nor did I state that my new car purchase was cheaper than a used car. I went through the math to show that they were relatively close in that very specific situation. It worked out to be about $3,000 to $4,000 more that I would pay over a 5-year period for the new car versus the used car. So I would be out extra money. Because of all the factors involved in that episode, in that situation, I didn't think it was a huge amount of different money, $3,000 to $4,000. This is also with the full knowledge that I am, while struggling to follow my own advice, I'm doing pretty good. I save about 20% a year, and I'm on pace to make my own target retirement date. So with all of that knowledge, I figured I could swing for a few $1,000s extra for a new car because, quite frankly, a new car is really fucking cool. But if you are 25 or 35 and you've not really started saving yet, you should pocket that $3,000 or $4,000 and invest it. When you get further along and you're making more money, then you could have that discussion about buying a new car. But anyway, I just wanted to clear that. So back to this variable universal life. This person sent this email and also sent a really beautiful Excel document. And I get Excel documents from people sometimes when they're working on something. And this one was, in the top tier. Very, very well done, very well organized. And the variable universal life, like a lot of this complicated stuff, has all these different options and calculations and things that you can add on. They call them riders. And generally it gets so fucking complicated. I'm not really sure what I'm looking at unless I sit down and do. But this person thankfully sent me the spreadsheet. It took me a little while to understand everything that they had done, and it looked perfect to me. But the basic question was, in these investment strategies, and the proposed plan was that they were going to spend $12,000 a year on this variable universal life. They would have a really big life insurance policy, and over time, they would be able to get all this growth. And because it's life insurance, if you do it just the right way and hold your breath and tilt your head correctly, you can end up with all of this money and not pay tax on it. That's true. But there's an expense with that. And he worked up 3 of the scenarios. And the scenarios worked out that in 30 years, he could have somewhere between 1.1 and 1.4 million. Or if he just had invested in the S&P 500 and paid the taxes, he'd have 1.7 million. So one of the first thoughts was, well, these numbers are pretty close. Shouldn't I just go with the lower volatility? And my first thought in my head was pretty close. The closest numbers, you lose at least $300,000. I don't consider giving up $300,000 close. No fucking way. Who wants to part with $300,000? But that was the closest scenario that this variable universal life could come up with based on actual historical data, was $300,000 short of you investing in the S&P 500 and paying taxes. So you would make so much more money that even after you pay the taxes, you would still end up with a net of $300,000 extra. But then there were some more details, and there's always these little details that you have to go through. The other thing is that the information the emailer sent me was beautiful. It was about 60 pages of illustrations. And the illustrations have all kinds of caveats and footnotes. Almost every page had a couple of footnotes. And one of the things that these life insurance companies will often do with something that's variable, usually it's tied to the market or some kind of performance. They may or may not tell you in the illustration what it's tied to. This one did tell you that it was tied to the S&P 500. And they used this funny phrase where they talked about point-to-point performance. So if you look at the actual price point of the S&P 500, and then a year later, you look at the price point of the S&P 500, and you can do this on many search engines on the internet and find out how much the S&P 500 has gone up, and it will match the numbers that this insurance company provided. Those numbers do not include the dividends that are paid each year by all of the stocks owned within the